Welcome to the Anarchist Transmission. I'm going to start off with a question that's been on my mind lately. When you look at the early Christian church that for 300 years was hunted down by the Roman Empire, people were hunted down like they were animals, killed, and more people sprung up in their place. That's quite a different Christian church than what we have today. And the real question I want to ask is, it seems today that the mainstream Christian church has this philosophy and this meme that they keep presenting on to other people that attend their churches, which is you obey the laws, you pay the taxes, and you live a good life, and God will reward you. And what I have to ask myself is, for 300 years, why would the Roman Empire hunt down people who were going to work and paying taxes and being good citizens in that respect? Why would you kill good citizens when you were taxing them and making money off of them? It was the Roman Empire. That's what it was about. Government hasn't changed. It's a money-making machine. The Roman Empire was just like we are today. So obviously there's something amiss, either somewhere in history or what we think of as the Christian church today. And I think we need to get to the bottom of that. Now, the social taboo is there's two things that you don't talk about, and that's religion and politics. And quite frankly, that makes no sense to me, because those are going to be the two biggest influences on how you live your life, from the time you're born till the time you're in the grave. And yet we're told we're not supposed to talk about it. We're just supposed to be swept along with the currents that they bring to us. Well, I'm not doing that anymore. My plan is to misbehave, and if you continue watching these, you can misbehave with me. So I'm going to go over some editorial from 1 Samuel. And we're going to compare and relate this to what goes on today and how it relates to the gun control argument, which is heating up to be the most politically charged argument currently out there right now. So I'm going to jump right in, and this is going to be from the New Jerusalem Bible. And I like the New Jerusalem Bible because it's a literal translation, which means that the translators were just working towards a literal translation. They weren't trying to imply or give any poetic meaning to the translation. They were just translating what it said as directly as they thought they could. Feel free to compare my translations to other translations if you don't like the New Jerusalem. I don't think the meaning's going to change all that much, though. So, 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 1 to 3. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges of Israel. His eldest son was called Joel, and second Abijah. They were judges at Beersheba. His sons did not follow his example, but seduced by the love of money, took bribes and gave biased verdicts. Now, this doesn't sound like any difference from any other judiciary system, including our current one or anyone throughout history. Judges would take bribes and paint up their verdicts and give biased verdicts with color of law. They would just continue to paint over and use so much law and so much other precedent and imply their meaning, because that's what judges do. They interpret law. And after so long, common sense goes out the window, and it just becomes legal arguments. Moral questions are left in the dust because it's just legal. It's no longer moral. But let's delve a little bit deeper and look at some of the subtext. Now, Beersheba was in southern Israel. Southern Israel happened to be bordered with Philistine. Now, in some of the upcoming verses, it's going to mention the Philistines and what's going on there. So one can clearly deduce that some of these crooked judgments are being brought in through what's going on with trade with Philistine and Israel at the time. Because Beersheba was one of the bigger encampments, so it was likely one that traded with bordering lands quite a bit. So how does this compare to the United States of today? We have international trade agreements, NAFTA, and all these other agreements. And so, do we take bribes? Do our officials take bribes? Do they have conflicting foreign interests from the money that's coming in from foreign sources? Well, let's consider a few things. Now, despite the fact that it's unconstitutional, in September of 2009, President Obama was the first president to serve as a chair on a UN Security Council. So, is he going to serve the UN, or is he going to serve the United States and those people? We don't know. We can't get into his head. We don't know what type of biases that produces for him. And they'll just make legal arguments painting color of law at anyone that criticizes this. You've got people like Leon Panetta that publicly will say that Obama concedes U.S. military control to the UN. So the U.S. military could, for all practical purposes, be under UN control. So the commander-in-chief, is he giving orders that are better for the U.S. or better for the UN? There's a lot of criticism about our foreign policy. The United States, despite having voted it down a few years ago, is now debating whether to adopt UN Agenda 21, which is highly controversial and fits right in with the gun control argument. People like Dianne Feinstein have said that we're an embarrassment internationally because we allow people the right to bear arms. They're allowed to keep guns. And that's an embarrassment to the rest of the world. Now, despite the fact that they take an oath to uphold the Constitution, which guarantees us that right, they're not really concerned about our rights or our Constitution. It seems that they're more concerned about the rest of the world. And we can definitely see that they have ties there. So, are we in the same situation? Are our judges or our officials taking bribes? Are they looking to uphold the interest of other people in foreign countries? Other agendas other than the American agenda? In the same way that Samuel's sons were looking to uphold Philistine's agenda rather than Israel's agenda? It's a complex issue. A lot of times we don't want to think about that, but these were complex political issues. And the Bible's really pretty sparse on what it says. So we're meant to read between the lines and think about this. We're not just meant to look at it at face value. So let's move on. Again, from the New Jerusalem Bible, 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 to 5. The elders of Israel assembled, went back to Samuel at Ramah, and said, "Look, you are old, and your sons are not following your example. So give us a king to judge us like the other nations. So now the elders of Israel, these were somewhat mouthpieces and voices for large communities, and they were elders. They were respected among the people. They were kind of the apparently they were the go-between for large groups of the public and of Israel and Samuel and these other more high-ranking officials. They were kind of the in-between. And so they're going up there and they're saying, we want a king. Israel doesn't have a king. And what we're looking at here is classic. This is a historical fact that goes on time and time again. When we see corruption, the outcry isn't to get rid of what's causing the corruption. The outcry is for more government expansion. It's for the government to grow bigger and police itself. How does that work exactly? We give you more power so that you can restrain your power and not have corruption. This has happened throughout history. And right now we're seeing this happen in the United States today. You can look out there and see high-ranking political officials that are saying they represent the public because we're a republic. We're a representative democracy. These high-ranking political officials are out there calling the Dianne Feinsteins, the Mayor Bloombergs, the Governor Cuomo's, asking for Obama to use his executive powers, executive fiat powers, to limit and restrain and repeal the Second Amendment because they're tired of Congress not doing it for them. They want to bypass the Constitution. And in the same way that these elders back in Israel wanted to bypass the laws and the way it was. Now, I'm not going to go too into detail about this, but Samuel gives them the king, but he gives them a stern warning about all the ills that could happen if you have a king, and they wanted a king anyway. And there's plenty of people out there that are crying out saying what's going to happen if Obama uses his powers, executive powers, to limit the Second Amendment and grow the executive branch of the government. But that doesn't stop them from crying. This comes off of Bloomberg.com, which states that Obama should use his executive powers, including making a recess appointment to fill the vacancy atop the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ordering all federal agencies to send data to the National Gun Background Check Database, and directing the Justice Department to step up prosecution of gun traffickers. So, even though in these most recent public mass shootings, these people were getting guns illegally. This Adam Lambda was denied 5 times buying guns himself, so he just kills his mother and steals her guns. So even though those checks were working, and even though those checks were working and he couldn't get a gun directly himself, it's not enough. They want more power because they want more power. Not because anything went wrong. Not because anything that anyone could have done to change what happened. They just don't want to see something that was unavoidable happen again. Which is crazy. It goes on to say there should be no delay in taking these steps, said Bloomberg, an independent, who said he spoke with Biden before the president's announcement and was very encouraged. Now, Biden recently was calling for more executive orders to do this. They were also calling for confiscation of unregistered guns. So they're going to go out door to door searching for unregistered guns, treating the general public like criminals. Now, I know I mentioned Mayor Bloomberg earlier. Keep in mind, he's the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg News that published that story. So what we need to consider was the fact that there was all these things going on, and bribes being taken by judges and officials, and it became a very corrupt system. so corrupt that the public was crying out. And these elders of Israel sought to have more power for themselves, so they asked for a king, because a king would grant them more power. And so there was a lot of political games going on and maneuvering going on there. And that was all because Israel was under a form of occupation, a political occupation, because the judges and officials were taking bribes likely from foreign money. They were taking Philistine money and pocketing it, rather than doing what was morally right. And we're under that same type of foreign occupation. Look out there, there's foreign news out there constantly talking about how we should repeal the Second Amendment. The Chinese government has said this, and they're our biggest debtor. So they've got a lot of influence with us because they've given us a lot of money. Rather than doing what's morally right, we're going to do what money dictates we should do. And that happens to be our debtors in China. So there's this occupation within the judicial system that allows money to have more weight than morals and when the public cries out for social justice. And that's where that comes into play. Now, there's some differences between our situation and Israel's situation. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 12. Now, Obama hasn't used his executive powers yet. There's a lot of outcry, just at the thought that he might. So this is, again, 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 12. The people then said to Samuel, "Who said, must we have Saul reigning over us? Hand the men over for us to put them to death." Don't you think that's going to happen here? That they're going to say anyone that criticized and said it was wrong for Obama to use executive power, they're a threat? Hand them over. Will they cry out for our deaths, or will they just cry out to have us put in internment camps, re-education camps? I mean, the proposed legislation out there, the Feinstein bill for gun owners, we're looking at the criminalization of gun owners through extra taxation. They're going to have to go down and be fingerprinted. They're going to be taxed if they want to keep their guns continually. Public reports are already being published of gun owners, and the people that were listed in these reports had death threats made against them. And they've been compared that they want gun owners to register on the public like that. They want them to treat them like they're pedophiles, like they're child molesters. For exercising your right will now become a privilege, and it's a privilege that will demonize you for having. So let's move on. 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 19 to 22. This goes on after Saul was named king. There was not a single blacksmith throughout the territory of Israel. The Philistines' reasoning being, "We do not want the Hebrews making swords or spears." Hence the Israelites were all in the habit of going down individually to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares, axes, mattocks, and scythes. The price was 2/3 of a shekel for plowshares and axes, and 1/3 for sharpening mattocks and straightening goads. So it was on that day of battle. No one in the army of Saul and Jonathan was equipped with either sword or spear. Only Saul and his son Jonathan were so equipped. So there's a lot going on in that block of verses there. And here's again where we have to say you have to look at more than the face value. It wasn't just that Israel didn't have swords and spears. This was a gregarian culture where farming was how you made your living. It was how you supplied and kept the public, well fed. It was how you sustained for yourself. So the Philistines, when they were happy that the Israelites didn't have their own blacksmiths or swords and spears, but not only that, they were dependent on them. So that also further leads to the fact that Israel, they've got this attitude, Israel won't do anything, they're dependent on us. They're weak. They're unarmed. They can do nothing to us. And in our modern culture, let's be honest, we're dependent on a lot of things that the government does as well. we're dependent on a modern society. We can't depend for ourselves. People that live in cities don't have gardens and can't grow food for themselves. We don't have livestock to eat from. Most people didn't grow up in rural areas where hunting is a culture, where you go out and find your own food. So we have an Israel that's disarmed against the Philistine, which is these foreign people which are just coming in and have become such a part of their economy. They're dependent on them. And Israel's, the public, is just sick of them. So apparently they're willing to go out there unarmed and face them to try to throw them out. Now, we're not at that point in the United States. We're still armed. We still have that ability. We don't need to ask for a king. We don't need to ask for a new government. We just need to take our position within our own government. Now, so we've got the Philistines making money off Israel, and we've got foreign oil companies and all these other industries making money off of us. With the new Health Care Act, we're required to buy health care. So these insurance companies are making money off of us. And we're not even given a choice of it. It's now our way of life. So, with this going on, do we really want to be unarmed the same way that Israel was? Do we want our government to leave us completely destitute? Or do we want to have the option that we can change things ourselves yet? Do we want to have that political power that, according to Mao, comes out of the barrel of a gun? I mean, how did Israel get to that point where they were disarmed from spears and swords, and that there were no blacksmiths? There was no Israel that was a blacksmith by trade, apparently, in the region. How did you get to that point? I mean, were Samuel's sons making judgments that were taking people's guns from them? Were they shutting down Israelite blacksmiths? I don't know, but I know in America that's what's going on. We're looking at proposed legislation which will shut down gun manufacturers, which will require, I mean, we've already got that requires some things that we're dependent upon. So if that's what happened in Israel, it's entirely possible that that very same thing could happen to the United States today. And the Philistines were armed. They were armed. They had swords and spears, apparently, because they weren't scared of that. They had the upper hand. Well, you can look it up on Breitbart and Examiner.com, and there's other sources that are carrying the same various stories about the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and other agencies that are taking and buying up ammunition in record numbers, 1.6 billion rounds in the past 18 months, I believe. And they're not just ordinary rounds, they're hollow point rounds, which are being used by domestic agencies. And they have to be, because you can't use hollow point rounds in wartime. It's against the Geneva Convention even. We're not even on the same level as foreign combatants, apparently. We're allowed to be treated much worse than you would treat a foreign soldier, than a foreign threat. So, let me ask you, are they trying to bolster themselves up to be the same way that the Philistines were? Protected against us while we are completely dependent on them for everything? I don't know. But philosophically and logically, there's only one reason I can see to disarm and restrain people. And that is if you consider them a threat. Let's consider some other factors about this, because let's consider what Israel was. Let's look at Exodus 22, verses 1 to 2. If a thief is caught breaking in and is struck a mortal blow, his blood may not be avenged. But if it happens after sunrise, his blood may be avenged. So, if somebody breaks into your house, this was the law that was handed down from Moses to Israel. This is what they lived by. If somebody broke into your home and they were an immediate threat to you, you were justified in killing them, and you didn't have to worry about any legal recourse from his family members or the surviving spouse or anything like that. You were free of the guilt legally because he was a threat to you. Now, let's compare that to the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-regulated militia. A militia is a citizen group, and you are necessary. A citizen group, armed, is necessary to the security of a free state. For this very reason, the federal government is not allowed to infringe upon your rights to keep and bear arms. So, the Second Amendment, in some ways, mirrors part of the Mosaic Law, that people have a right to defend themselves from people that are a direct threat to them. A natural right to self-defense, and it's a natural right because it preceded the government that just pinned it down in the Constitution. It preceded all of that. Every bit of it. And here it is in the Bible, thousands of years before that. Israel recognized it. They believed that it came from Moses, directly from God. That you could defend yourself if somebody broke in and tried to steal your property or harm you or your family. So it's a natural right. And I encourage anybody that's watching this to look into that. Look into the difference between natural rights and political rights. Natural rights are just part of being alive. They're natural. They come from the fact that you're a human being. They weren't granted to you by the government. So let's look ahead and let's look at Luke in the New Testament. Let's see what Jesus has to enter in on the subject. He said to them, "When I sent you out without purse or haversack or sandals, were you short of anything?" "No, nothing," they said. He said to them, "But now if you have a purse, take it, and the same with the haversack. If you have no sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Because I tell you, these words of Scripture are destined to be fulfilled in me." He was counted as one of the rebellious. Yes, what it says about me is even now reaching its fulfillment. Gun owners are now being demonized. You are now counted as being rebellious and a threat to the government for exercising what the government has already recognized as your natural right. Your natural rights. And you're rebellious if you want to uphold your natural rights, which they're not allowed to take away from you. I'm going to ask this question, and the answer seems pretty obvious to me, and I hope that you can see the obvious answer as well. Does the U.S. government consider the public a threat? Do they consider people within the public to be rebellious? Self-defense is a natural right. Animals recognize this. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. God gave them sharp fangs, claws, agility and speed. Not just because they're carnivores, but because they have to defend themselves from other carnivores as well. We have to defend ourselves from dangers that are out there in the world that nobody can stop or nobody can change. And now we're being asked to give up our means of self-defense. People die being mauled by wild animals all the time. I don't see legislation to go out and declaw wild animals to try and make them less lethal to killing people. When people get killed in animal attacks, and that does happen, why aren't we looking at these animals and saying they're a threat to our society? Why aren't we looking at that and saying, well, let's go in, sedate these animals, and take the dangerous part of their nature, because it's a very part of their being. And so is your right to natural self-defense. It sounds crazy when you talk about taking, claws from wild animals and dulling their fangs. But for some reason it sounds reasonable to people in government and government officials who surround themselves with armed security to take your ability to arm yourself and defend yourself the best you can from you or me or anyone else. We have to recognize as a people what comes from the government and what just comes from being alive. Politics and religion. Two very dangerous subjects we're told to mix. It's like mixing oil and water. They don't go together. And yet, the Bible has a lot of political commentary about the very same issues that are affecting us today that affected Israel thousands of years ago, that affected Israel throughout the ages. And yet we don't want to look at the history that's there and learn from it. We're willing to go and be unarmed against the Philistines all over again, against the corrupt people, against the foreign corporations and banks that we are now dependent on. We're willing to let them disarm us now, apparently. At least that's what we're told. So let's think about that. Think about that. Read through these passages yourself. I don't care if you agree with me or not. You don't have to. But you should read it and think for yourself and draw your own conclusions. And you should understand that you're not a threat to the government. You are the government. It's a representative democracy. You can't be a threat to yourself. This has been my first installment of the Anarchist Transmission. I hope you'll come back and join us for more.